my history, my geography, and reduced them and everything they have ever known to figurines as evidence that I was in divine favor. What if all this was in my power? Could I resist it? No one ever has. And they were rude. They were rude to each other. They didn't like each other very much. They didn't like each other in the way they didn't like me. And it occurred to me that their dislike for me was one of the few things they agreed on. I was on a train in England with a friend, an English woman. Before we were in England, she liked me very much. In England, she didn't like me at all. She didn't like the claim I said I had on England. She didn't like the views I had of England. I didn't like England. She didn't like England. But she didn't like me not liking it too. She said, I want to show you my England. I want to show you the England that I know and love. I had told her many times before that I knew England, and I didn't want to love it anyway. She no longer lived in England. It was her own country, but it had not been kind to her, so she left. On the train, the conductor was rude to her. She asked something, and he responded in a rude way. She became ashamed. She was ashamed at the way he treated her. She was ashamed at the way he behaved. This is the new England, she said. But I liked the conductor being rude. His behavior seemed quite appropriate. Earlier, this had happened. We had gone to a store to buy a shirt for my husband. It was meant to be a special present, a special shirt to wear on special occasions. This was a store where the Prince of Wales has his shirts made, but the shirts sold in this store are beautiful all the same. I found a shirt I thought my husband would like, and I wanted to buy him a tie to go with it. When I couldn't decide which one to choose, the salesman showed me a new set. He was very pleased with these, he said, because they bore the crest of the Prince of Wales, and the Prince of Wales had never allowed his crest to decorate an article of clothing before. There was something in the way he said it. His tone was slavish, reverential, odd. It made me feel angry. I wanted to hit him. I didn't do that. I said, my husband and I hate princes. My husband would never wear anything that had a prince's anything on it. My friend stiffened. The salesman stiffened. They both drew themselves in, away from me. My friend told me that the prince was a symbol of her Englishness, and I could see that I had caused offense. I looked at her. She was an English person, the sort of English person I used to know at home, the sort who was nobody in England, but somebody when they came to live among the people like me. There were many people I could have seen England with, but I was seeing it with this particular person, a person who reminded me of the people who showed me England long ago, as I sat in church or at my desk, made me feel silent and afraid. For I wondered if, all these years of our friendship, I had had a friend or had been in the thrall of a racial memory. I went to Bath. We, my friend and I, did this. But though we were together, I was no longer with her. The landscape was almost as familiar as my own hand, but I had never been in this place before, so how could that be again? And the streets of Bath were familiar too, but I had never walked on them before. It was all those years of reading, starting with Roman Britain. Why did I have to know about Roman Britain? It was of no real use to me, a person living on a hot, drought-ridden island, and it is of no use to me now, and yet my head is filled with this nonsense, Roman Britain. In Bath, I drank tea in a room I had read about in a novel written in the 18th century. In this very same room, young women wearing those dresses that rustled and so on, danced and flirted, and sometimes disgraced themselves with young men, soldiers, sailors, who were on their way to Bristol, or someplace like that. So many places like that, where so many adventures, the outcome of which was not good for me, began. Bristol, England. A sentence that began, that night the ship sailed from Bristol, England, would end not so good for me. And then I was driving through the countryside in an English motor car, on narrow, winding roads, and they were so familiar, though I had never been on them before, and through little villages, the names of which I somehow knew so well, though I had never been there before. And the countryside did have all those hedges and hedges, fields hedged in. I was marveling at all the toil of it, the planting of the hedges to begin with, and then the care of it, all that clipping, year after year of clipping. And I wondered at the lives of the people who would have to do this, because wherever I see and feel the hands that hold up the world, I see and feel myself and all the people who look like me. And I said, those hedges. And my friend said that someone, a woman named Mrs. Rothschild, worried that the hedges weren't being taken care of properly. The farmers couldn't afford or find the help to keep up the hedges, and often they replaced them with wire fencing. I might have said to that, well, if Mrs. Rothschild doesn't like the wire fencing, why doesn't she take care of the hedges herself? But I didn't. And then in those fields that were now hemmed in by wire fencing, that a privileged woman didn't like, was planted a vile yellow flowering bush that produced an oil. And my friend said that Mrs. Rothschild didn't like this either. It ruined the English countryside. It ruined the traditional look of the English countryside. It was not at that moment that I wished every sentence, everything I knew that began with England would end with, and then it all died. We don't know how, it just all died. At that moment, I was thinking, who are these people who forced me to think of them all the time? Who forced me to think that the world I knew was incomplete or without substance, or to not measure up because it was not England? That I was incomplete or without substance, and did not measure up because I was not English. Who were these people? The person sitting next to me couldn't give me a clue. No one person could. In any case, if I had said to her, I find England ugly. I hate England. The weather is like a jail sentence. The English are a very ugly people. The food in England is like a jail sentence. The hair of English people is so straight, so dead-looking. The English have an unbearable smell, so different from the smell of people I know. Real people, of course. She would have said that I was a person full of prejudice. Apart from the fact that it is I, that is, the people who look like me, who made her aware of the unpleasantness of such a thing, the idea of such a thing, prejudice. She would have been only partly right, sort of right. I may be capable of prejudice, but my prejudices have no weight to them. My prejudices have no force behind them. My prejudices remain opinions. My prejudices remain my personal opinion. And a great feeling of rage and disappointment came over me as I looked at England, my head full of personal opinions that could not have my public, approval. The people I come from are powerless to do evil on grand scale. The moment I wished every sentence, everything I knew that began with England would end with, and then it all died. We don't know how, it just all died. Was when I saw the white cliffs of Dover. I had sung hymns and recited poems that were about a longing to see the white cliffs of Dover again. At the time I sang the hymns and recited the poems, I could really long to see them again because I had never seen them at all, nor had anyone around me at the time. But there we were, groups of people longing for something we had never seen. And so there they were, the white cliffs. But they were not that pearly, majestic thing I used to sing about. That thing that created such a feeling in these people that when they died in the place where I lived, they had themselves buried facing a direction that would allow them to see the white cliffs of Dover when they were resurrected, as surely they would be. The white cliffs of Dover, when finally I saw them, were cliffs, but they were not white. You would only call them that if the word white meant something special to you. They were dirty, and they were steep. They were so steep, the correct height from which all my views of England, starting with the map before me in my classroom and ending with the trip I had just taken, should jump and die and disappear forever.
Now, Kincaid's essay is truly genius in the way in which she is able to construct a statement about privilege and prejudice, doing it through the power of symbols, beginning, of course, with a map of England, and then working to her father's felt hat, and then finally the genius Cliffs of Dover. In between, of course, is her coming to terms with the ways in which culture is the air that a child breathes growing up. And yet, as a person of color, she never completely understood what it meant to be always in awe of England. And, of course, all of the prejudices that are innate to that. The powerful image, for example, of her holding her head up to the window, being forced to see what she can herself never fully experience. Compelling. Notice we began, first of all, with the idea of sight. Now, let's go ahead at 3A and start there. You really can't read this outstanding essay without an appreciation of Plato's Republic. The cave allegory of Book 7, we've given lectures, full lectures on this in elsewhere at learnstrong.net. But the idea that people sit chained up so that they are looking at shadows on a wall, believing those shadows to be absolutely real, this notion of sight and the notion of perspicacity, insight. We have outside, I can see you, you can see me outside, but insight. That doesn't mean you roll your eyes in the back of your head and you see your brain. No. It means that you come to some understanding of the ways in which you have been formed through an education, not of your own choosing, that will give you some sense of who you are and what you are. It'll only be later, of course, in the life of the young narrator that she'll begin to recognize she isn't at all what she has been raised to believe that she is. Of course, by the 6th paragraph, we are working with the idea of the privileged versus the poor. That is to say, they. I can't help but in this paragraph be reminded at 3A of Toni Morrison's classic, The Bluest Eye, and the idea that we long often for the things that are being held up in front of us as being the great things of culture, only to discover later that those privileged things are not as joy-filled as they appear to be. She continues by talking by paragraph 7 about the realities. Of course, the challenge is that the realities are then so much of what England stands for, represents, is oppression, especially oppression of people of color. And by the time she comes to realize this, she has all kinds of cognitive dissonance about what that means. It seems to me that paragraph 10 and her treatment of Columbus is central to the reading of this essay. The space between the idea of something and its reality is always wide and deep and dark. She finishes by saying the idea, that idea Christopher Columbus had, was more powerful than the reality he met. So the reality he met died. She then speaks, of course, of herself as what it means to be grown up. She speaks in paragraph 12 of the monuments that are everywhere. Monuments of vile people, street names after really bad people who themselves are only infamous because of their involvement in the slave trade. And to that degree, she will see them as figurines. It is clear that then the final exchange between her and this friend is going to bring to fruition the idea of privilege and prejudice. Notice she will talk about the power of the symbol of the hedges, namely, who is keeping up the hedges. And now no one there to keep up the hedges. In paragraph 15 on page 207, she says it this way. She says, in the countryside, did have all those hedges, and hedges feels hedged in, the symbol is compelling. I was marveling at all the toil of it, the planning of the hedges to begin with, and then the care of it, all that clipping, year after year of clipping, and I wondered at the lives of the people who would have to do this, because whenever I see and feel the hands that hold up the world, I see and feel myself and all the people who look like me. Notice the genius of what Kincaid does. She uses the imagery of Atlas holding up the world, and she points out that so much of the world as we see it, especially these beautiful constructions, were done by the oppressed, often people of color. Finally, of course, the word privileged gets used in this essay in the 15th paragraph, and yet by this point, the point's already been made. Privileged people don't recognize that they're privileged, and of course our speaker here did not recognize until quite later in her life the means whereby her own subjugation had happened, and of course her prejudices. But notice she says about her prejudices that they are in fact really powerless prejudices, opinions more, because they lack the power to enforce any kind of change. She says, the people I come from are powerless to do evil on grand scale. Of course, the final symbol of Dover is the compelling symbol. It isn't white, actually. It's rather dirty. And to that degree, her criticism, her critique of England is a compelling one. Now let's jump to 2A, themes, messages. Of course, one clear message here is that when we are people of privilege, we often don't recognize that at all. And likewise, people who are not of privilege often are forced to think of themselves as somehow incomplete, needing somehow to be something other than what they are. And education is, of course, the indoctrination method whereby so regularly this happens. That is to say, this is an essay about the quest for perspicacity, insight. Because one can only understand once one has perspicacity, insight. At 2B, of course, we've mentioned the symbolism. It is compelling, truly brilliant essay from this perspective of developing ideas through symbols that are quite compelling. At 3A, so many titles come to mind here. What are the titles for you that speak most powerfully to these ideas? The work, of course, of Toni Morrison immediately comes to mind. Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God as well. So much written by the great Alice Walker. In Search of Our Mother's Gardens comes to mind as being a classic parallel exemplar of this type of thing. The desire to construct beauty in a world that isn't beautiful and to understand oneself within that world. Of course, Everyday Use is a title that we've lectured as well that comes to mind. Finally, at 3B, what are your thoughts about an essay like this? If you are, of course, an individual who reads this essay and is insulted by this essay, I think Kincaid would ask, really, why? What is it that's so insulting about stating the self-evident truths? The slave trade was horrific, and individuals who were leaders of that slave trade shouldn't be considered as anything other than vile. I mean, how do you argue against a view like that? And yet, where do you come down on this in this essay? How do you deal with privilege? How do you deal with prejudice in your own life, as you experience it, as maybe you profess it? I think this is worth our time of study, the genius of Kincaid. Hopefully it'll lead you to more of her amazing work. Thank you.